Honorable Foreign Minister Johnson, Deputy Secretary General, in CARICOM, Sir Hilary, Beckles, colleagues. First of all, thanks to the really good and exciting keynote in emphasizing, and as you have heard from the Foreign Minister and the Deputy Secretary General, much of what we have been sounding for several years. In the last 3 years or so, the countries of the Caribbean and SIDS in general, we have experienced some of the worst devastating effects of climate change. You've heard a lot of emphasis on the destruction of our economies as a result of climate change. We have had in the Caribbean and in the Pacific significant damage from hurricanes, some of the strongest hurricanes experienced in Dominica. You heard reference of that, Antigua and Barbuda, Bahamas, Fiji, Vanuatu, and so on. SIDS have faced many challenges, including the highest adaptation cost per capita of any countries in the world. The rising incidence of shocks continue to be wished away, and it is the most important negative trend in international development, and it disproportionately affects SIDS. The evidence is clear, and the assessment of the last global financial crisis and the current global economic crisis, the current global pandemic, and a slew of environmental disasters make it difficult for SIDS to see any real short or medium-term growth. These challenges have increased the pressures on SIDS to continue to call for access to multiple sources of finance in order to compensate for funding gaps that exist and are forced on us that are no fault of ours. Soaring inequality across SIDS, high debt levels, complex financing processes, overlapping program and limited capacity are all results for our vulnerability. I was very interested in the keynote speaking of not only the vulnerability that we so often focus on our climate brought on by our geographical position, which I will come back to, but also the vulnerability of scarce resources and human resources. We have one of the best universities in the world in the Caribbean, along with a number of other universities. I wonder if we know how many of our trained and our graduates remain with us or we lose to other parts of the world, which then continues to create pressures on island states like ours in the Caribbean, and add to the vulnerability of scarce resources, scarce human resources. As small states, we have presented numerous options, with the most practical being the application of a vulnerability index. We have been talking here a lot about that. We have presented ways to define that index, and we ask ourselves, what will it take for the world to truly change and respond to this? Because SIDS are not homogeneous. Some of us, as you have been hearing already, are LDCs. The majority of us are MICs, and a few of us are high income, which puts us in a unique place. The only method that we feel that enables equal financial access across all SIDS would be to come up with a vulnerability index that goes beyond income levels as a measurement. We have heard much of that. The main question here is how we do that. How would we build that index? There are several before us, several before the financial community, the world financial community, and we propose to introduce accelerating new approaches. We want to bring these indices that are already out there together. There is not, and to look at the special circumstances of SIDS. And there are special circumstances already defined. And we need to be able to take those special groupings of countries and the decisions on vulnerabilities, which are already there, that should be based on things like the international accepted definition of what makes us SIDS. Therefore, a vulnerability index should be based on our particular physical location, our small size, and exposure to social and economic and environmental shocks. And these should also constitute internal and external factors that creates these shocks. The measurement should also take these factors into account, the size and frequency of these shocks. So it's not just that we are vulnerable because we are exposed to hurricane, but as I think the foreign minister mentioned, we are exposed to hurricane year after year, and therefore our economy is turned backwards year after year. The degree of exposure to these shocks should be measured, and the capacity of the SIDS to respond to these shocks. And do we have the ability to build resilience to these? So the keynote address that we heard an hour ago, building on some of those points that was made by the professor, we need to take those factors and look at the different, not just the general positions that we face in our geographical position, not just the fact that we are exposed, but also how often do we face these things? What are the external and internal factors that account for these vulnerabilities that we face? We have spoken many, many times, and we at the United Nations are making, I think, key steps towards this vulnerability. But this now is the time for action. We have been speaking a lot, and in a strange way, out of adversity can come opportunity. And out of the pandemic should, we hope, come the opportunity that the world will finally listen to what small island states. We were the ones who led the world in the 1990s into taking climate change much more seriously than at any other time, that now people are beginning to look up. We want them also to take our plea for a vulnerability index to measure our survival. Otherwise, we are going to find ourselves into greater trouble. We will never accomplish the 2030 agenda if the vulnerability index is not deployed now as a measurement, and we get rid of the single economic measurement that